Very good. Here we
There
go.
we go.
So, hello everyone. My name is Mitun Zavery. Welcome to our panel discussion for our developers, the new frontline of security. Today we have a really good sort of panel set of attendees with us today, joining us to kind of discuss this particular topic. I'm going to let us all introduce ourselves, and then we can get started. So. Obviously, I've already introduced myself, Mitun Zavery. I'm actually a solution architect at an organization called Onsite. In the past, I've been a developer. I've also worked at organizations that integrate different software tools together. I've also been a tester. I've actually been on the left-hand side of the spectrum as well, educating developers on how to use SCM systems, best practices around migrating from Subversion to Git as well. So a very colored past, different approaches to different things. That's a little bit about me. I'll pass it off to one of the other individuals on the call. Bas, do you want to take it away?
Sure. My name is Bas Geerdink. Maybe some of you have already heard me speak yesterday on fast data. So I'm a big data engineer, AI specialist, pragmatist, you could call that. My background is actually artificial intelligence. That's what I studied a long time ago already. So it's not really compared maybe to the AI students that I meet nowadays, who are much more skilled in the tools and in the machine learning models, etc. But I graduated in 2004. That also gives me a bit of a, I guess, background and seniority in all kinds of software development aspects. So did a lot of work on software engineering, software architecture, but also team leadership, etc. I had many roles. Currently, I'm working as an independent consultant for my own company, Isonic. And yeah, I have a role at the moment at Wayfair, which is a big platform for home goods, where I'm giving the lead on the team for data engineering to basically make more use of machine learning models in their production environment.
Fantastic. Amir, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, hi, thank you. So my name is Amir Shaked. Today I'm VP of R&D at ProMeterX, a company which does application security for websites and mobile applications. In my history, I've been a bit over 20 years now in the industry, doing various positions of software engineering, a lot of black hat, white hat positions of security hacker, and the past few years running teams, engineering groups, DevOps groups, and happy to join this wonderful panel discussing a very dear issue to me.
Very good. Adam, you want to take it away?
Yeah, so I work with Mitun at Sonatype, another solutions architect. I've got various experience from development in things like IoT through to enterprise kind of operations applications, and also been a product owner, product manager, so kind of seen that full software development life cycle, and yeah, like to help people with that and securing their pipelines. So that's me.
Fantastic. Okay, so I mean, let's kick this off, right? I think it's a really interesting topic, and I think it's kind of wide-arching as well. So we can sort of cover various different areas. But let's start off with one particular question that I've always kind of considered is how has the role of the developer changed, right? Since if you look back, I think for the past 5 years, how's that? Have they become more relevant, less relevant? What's the role of the developer? I'll pass that to Amir actually, because obviously VP of R&D. This is like you said, is a very, very close and sensitive topic for you. So, what's your opinion on this?
Yeah, it's a really good question. The way I see it, over the years, we're already adding more and more responsibilities on the developers, the software engineers. In a way, we're keep discussing on shifting left items and requiring more from the engineers. And the question I have in mind is, what are we giving them as support and tools and education and all kinds of various tools and management tools, supporting tools in order to support that. It started with the shift for teams doing having no QA teams, just being responsible end-to-end on their coding, and then responsible end-to-end on the quality, on the deployment, with more shifting of DevOps, being more responsible to everything around the code and the deployment and the production. And now with security, we're just adding another layer, asking them to do everything around the code being secured, both in the development environment, but also in production. How will they, and what are we giving them in that respect? And at least some of those things, as I see them, is a lot of education. Teaching them things like threat modeling, for example, bringing that closer to the design phase and helping them see the things as a hacker would. And I think that's part of the challenge. On a lot of the different items, quality, production, engineers have that frame of mind and can do that well. But when we're talking about security, we're actually looking at a different frame of mind of a hacker, looking at how to break things, how can they use shortcuts to evade different security protocols. So it's a constant phase of education, because a good developer won't necessarily have that frame of mind. They will see how they build something. They won't understand how a hacker can just bypass everything and abuse what they built and evade all that. So I think that is a very big challenge and different from the other things that we're doing with the shift left in the engineering world.
Do you think it's maybe too much for the developers of today?
No. Well, it is a lot, I would have to say, but I don't think it's too much because I don't see another way to do it. If we separate the functions, it's okay to have a separate function of security, doing pen testing and security audits and all of that. That's required. But that won't replace somebody really understanding the threat model and the security concerns in what they're actually building. If we're completely separate between the two, the engineers will always build things faster than your security can audit and check them. Same as the quality assurance shift phase. So it is a lot, but it has to be. I don't see another way around that. But it means we need to build the supporting tools and processes around that and the education in order to support that.
Yeah. I mean, it's really interesting. You state obviously the complexity of the problem, right? And you mentioned developers are moving faster. There is a statistic in the industry that states that there are effectively 100 developers to 10 ops people and 1 security person. Now, from a banking perspective, let's say, Bas, from your past history and experience, right? Is that something that can be overcome, right? Is that something that is easy, or there is a process there that can be implemented?
Yeah, I am a bit worried, to be honest, because I've seen the role of a developer change tremendously in the last 15 years or so. So yeah, I completely agree with everything that Amir said. I think it should be a part of the developer's role, and it should be part of the job to know about security and to know what secure coding is and to know tools that can help you and support you. But I think a lot of people are not coming from such a background. It's mostly just an afterthought, right? They learn maybe, like, if you go to university, you might have had a course about security, but then you end up in an enterprise, and then suddenly it feels like you're overwhelmed, right? It's like almost too much. You have certainly all kinds of frameworks and tools and guidelines and audits that you have to deal with, basically. And that is quite worrisome, to be honest. I don't have a good solution. There's no silver bullet, right? As we always say. Yeah. But maybe a bit more attention to these kind of things already in the beginning of someone's career or in universities or those kinds of things would, I think, be really good, because it is everywhere, right? It is. So what I was seeing in the past 15 years as well, this the complexity has grown quite a lot, right? There's much more layers to software development. There's and a lot of things are very important to secure. So you have the cloud layers, you have the application layer, but also the data itself. Everything needs its own security layers, and also the architectures that I see evolving are very complex, with microservices, with message bus in betweens, with multiple frameworks lying around everywhere, and that is not easy in itself. And add the security to that, and you have even more complex situations. So it is quite a challenge, I think, for developers.
You bring another point. I think that is actually really important that you bring here is kind of education, right? Is what are we doing, in the industry to help developers with this? So what do you think? And this is a question to all of you, really, right? Is what are the skills do you think that are required? Because we mentioned, maybe in university, maybe in education, right? Maybe there is a formal type of training, and there exists obviously training around this, but it's not very developer centric, right? It's not very developer focused. So what kind of skills are the developers of today, required to have, to consider this whole shift left mentality and align with what I guess the world is doing?
Yeah, well, I would say make it a bit more fun. So I really enjoyed courses like Think Like a Hacker, right? And crawl under the skin of somebody who wants to break your system. That's just plain out fun. And you learn a lot from that. So I think that's the point where we can start. But also, I think it's important to start with a bit of the cultural aspects. Like security is not an afterthought; it's something that is really important in all your everything that you do. And not just for developers, by the way. Yeah? So we're talking about developers, but we have DevOps teams at the moment. So also business people, testers, everybody should make this an attention point.
Yeah, and Adam, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's been rapidly accelerating, and for what we see, it's always automation is the key to all of this. Going back to getting the information into the developers' hands quicker seems to always be the key in all aspects, whether it's security, or anything else. I wish I had a lot of the tooling when I was a developer that hangs around now, and the automated pull request and everything else.
Yeah, it's really interesting, obviously, because and you bring a really good point there, right? So the developer works in their own sort of bubble and ecosystem, right? It's kind of the SCM is their world, right? So again, I guess this is maybe a question to Amir. Does this make sense, right, for developers to sort of have this almost bit of tunnel vision towards the SCM? Right? Is that the right approach, or not? Maybe is there a? I guess maybe it's the pull between push capabilities out, features out faster. That pressure of doing that, is that what is not allowing the developer to sort of look more broadly rather than in their own tool sets?
So, actually, on that front, I think I would less prefer to see the developers going into the CM and looking at the logs and audits and the analytics, because it's a different type of specialty. Looking through those different items and identifying risks and potential breaches and loopholes. Where I want to see them focusing is in the design phase, in the engineering phase, in tools telling them, within your pipeline, there is a risk, there is a problem, and embedding into that the education that we discussed. A few things that I've seen that work a bit better, or that I'm trying to do within my own groups, is making it interesting for them. I think Bas, you said it very well. It should be fun. So workshops, always better than endless slides and hours of videos. Workshops, and making it as relevant as possible is for those developers. For example, if you have a pen test and they found something, take that and use that as an education item. It won't be something theoretical that may be relevant for another company. It's something that happened within their environment, and that will actually be very interesting because it will bridge the gap of, let's see it from the attacker's frame of mind. They found something, even if it's small, it's still something interesting that they haven't thought of because it was available within the system. So make it as a
incorporate that into something like a retrospective.
Yeah, exactly. It's totally like something like a retrospective, like a bug analysis, but a different type of bug, and make sure they learn from it and understand it. But that doesn't replace the right tools. But I wouldn't go as far as the CM. I still want to see the CM being used by either a specific SOC analyst or the DevSecOps group, if the one exists, because they're going to look at other metrics as well, like who's logging into the machines, and in a way, I don't want to put all the security measures in one basket. So it's not only on the engineers.
Yeah, well, I would like to add to that those tools don't. I'm happy with all those tools indeed, but they won't cover everything. Because look at, if you're looking in an environment which is complicated, there's not only code that you work with, but also some scripts that lie around. There is identity and access management, of course. There's role-based access, etc. That also has to be all part of your, umbrella of security that you want to implement in your team, and also you want to be aware of that as a developer. And I think it's a very good point to make that it should be part of maybe retrospective and also design phase. It should be a part of the culture basically of and of your process, your daily process of how you work as a team. But that is probably even more important than having some tools lying around. So the tools is always that's the conclusion. That's the last phase. That's where you're going to do it. You implement the right tool, and you have great tools in the market at the moment, or you have framework that do your code checking. They check your SQL injection. Or everything that you want to secure is there. But it's more about, I think, getting that in as part of your DNA almost as a team that you're in.
And do you think that's the responsibility of the organization to allow the developers to do that? Is that something that again, come back to? Is this something that when you talk about the DNA, should this be something that's part of the DNA of the organization?
Yes, I think so. I definitely think so. Because I think it's not easy to you cannot put that responsibility on the people themselves, because like I work with some teams, and they, for example, maybe in the data environment it's even more apparent. There's data scientists, for example, that have learned a very important and very good skill, for example, to build machine learning models, or data analysts that know how to build reports and that know how to build data pipelines and queries. But if you cannot make it their responsibility to secure everything, because they don't know the skills, and they probably have not learned it quickly enough. So the organization should start with probably like a management push, or it should be part of the leadership that this is made important.
So it almost comes down to a bit of with that age-old saying, people, process, tools, right? This is the culture part, right, of the process, right? Is helping organizations to really push that down, and that's a really interesting point, right? Having spoken to many organizations, typically organizations tend to have a central tools team, right, or a central function for security, or a central function for development. But there really isn't this sort of cultural changes, process change group within organizations that advocates these kind of learnings, right? These workshops, these retrospectives that need to be done. It's very rare to find in an organization people doing that, actually. And I've found, anyway, from my experience, that most of the time when you are speaking to individuals, especially around trying to implement open source governance or security in the pipeline, with the developers, getting the buy-in of the developer is extremely hard, right? The developer has now become quite influential in the organizations because they effectively can say no, right? If it's something that they dislike, they have the power and influence now to say no. And so we need to find a way, I think, of reaching the mind share of the developer so that we're not coming across as sucking eggs, right? We're not coming across as like we're teaching you how to do your job. It's really about this is what the market is seeing as a problem at the moment. And I think developers are extremely intelligent, right? They see this as something that is they can fix the problem, right? And certainly they can fix the problem, right? But it requires the entire motion, right, of the entire team or the entire organization to do. And one thing comes to mind actually when I think about this is CodeCov, right? I mean, if you look at what's happened with CodeCov recently, that was a potential attack vector that affected developers directly, right? And the tools that they were doing. And in fact, it was a tool used for security, right? Ironically enough. How do you think, what learnings can we take from that? Because, we've talked about we need to educate the developers, we need to empower them more. But by empowering them with the tools, they were still hurt, right, by CodeCov. So what are the learnings we need to take away from that, do you think?
That's it's a big question, but looking at the CodeCov as an example, and even looking further back to similar examples that maybe wasn't directly on security products, but on other products that developers brought in and used within their own environment, or the entire vector of supply chain attacks on the engineering pipeline is definitely, first of all, it's a growing risk. And there is a reason it is a growing risk, because it is, again, going to the hacker frame of mind, it is the shortest path of success. It's hard to breach into a very secure organization, but sometimes a small startup or a small company which doesn't have the right security measures, you can breach them and through them roll onto all their existing customers and code bases. And we had multiple such examples in the past few years. CodeCov was definitely a very big issue recently, but we had things like the what was their name? The Inbenda case where they leaked into Ticketmaster and stole credit cards from their website, as an example.
Magic Card, was it? The Magic Card?
Yeah, Magic Card, and there were other multiple examples, but again, through a third-party vendor, which you might even had security audits and security measures, but the code changed not within the sandbox environment, but only within the production environment being served outside. So it's also another example. The way I see it, first, it means that creating the tools, it's why I think we still need a separation of processes. We need to have the developers with the tools and the security measures and the responsibility to create secure environments, but we also need the security team to audit, to look for gaps, to be the watchdogs on the environment. And that can come from anywhere. The tool being used, how they're being used. CodeCov was an example of a vendor being breached, but it can also be a vendor being misused. If you're having an APM package manager where you're uploading code and you're uploading the wrong versions with the secrets inside. I think a recent survey said that around 16 or 20% of cloud-based breaches last year was around misuse of S3 buckets, as an example. So the takeaway I see from that, and at least to summarize to at least one, is you can't blindly trust. tools that you use. You need to have your own guards and audits. If you're having an external pen test, and I personally think pen test has to be an external service. It can't be from within the organization. They need to be unbiased and have them look as broad as possible on the different risk factors. And if what you're providing is a tool for other companies, like we do as an example, we create software that other companies install. We need to look at the potential risk that we can create and make sure that all that pipeline is tight and secure. So it really comes down to the risk that you can create either for yourself or to your customers. And that has to be specific. That can't be generalized for all companies.
Yeah, and that's really interesting you say that. So I 100% agree with, I think pen testing should be external, right? It should have no bias to it at all. So a question about that, just kind of following on from that is the example we used obviously was potentially a vendor being breached, right, or misused, let's say. And CodeCoff is an example which was kind of related to more of a software supply chain, right? And I think we'll go into kind of what does that mean, because I think that topic that most developers don't really understand the concept of software supply chain. But from a pen testing perspective, does a pen test take into consideration the entire software supply chain, or is it a much more focused approach to security? I mean, what does it, what would you say it covers?
Well, today, traditionally, it covers either your code or your external endpoints, what you're exposing to the world.
Yeah.
So in that sense, a pen test wouldn't find a vendor or supply chain risk unless you're doing a very dedicated pen test, looking at their entire pipeline. And I actually don't know of a lot of, I would even say, pen test vendors that even do that, because they usually focus on the OWASP top 10 and classic tools that they can use, which are still very good, but they don't cover the full pipeline of.
No, I think pen tests serve one purpose, and they do serve well, and they, as Amir said, they should be hired in the right way, etc., and then they serve a really good purpose. But there's a lot of other security breaches that can happen, and this is just one of the mechanisms that is available to you as a team normally. But if you look at most of the big data breaches, I think they come from attacks from the inside, so to say, maybe from phishing attacks, or from people that have been bribed internally, or those kind of things.
Okay.
And what I wanted to say about that still, also as a follow-up maybe on your question about the CodeCoff breach, is that that's another thing that has changed in the past years, I think. There's much more media attention to these kind of things, and rightfully so. And of course, in the EU, we have the GDPR Act, so that also is a good development. So there is a law that says if you have a data breach in your organization, you should publish it. It has to be made, available to the public, so people can learn from it and should have a right to know what happens with their data. And those kind of things are really, really important. Also, for the awareness, the general awareness in the public, but also for every colleague that you have, because they will also start thinking about, hey, I saw this this data breach at maybe one of the vendors. Maybe we're not using that specific type of technology, but what about our own tool? Are they also secure? So it does, I think, lead to a better overall situation. And of course, the breaches are very wrong, and they don't help at all. But the awareness that comes from that is really good. And I also, as another example, I want to highlight the PlayStation breach of, I think, 2 years ago or something or like that. It had a huge impact on a lot of people, because I think credit cards were made out in the public for everybody almost that had a PlayStation account, and that gave a certain sort of insight, like, hey, oh, wait a minute, these are the things that can happen, right, if security is not in order.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about GDPR, and that's a really, I think, especially for Europe as a whole, right? It's become really sort of prevalent to organizations that they need to consider implementing changes that focus around things that affect the brand, right? PlayStation, if you think about that, they saw a nosedive in their shares, right? Especially when that happened. But there was a exodus of some individuals. You wouldn't see that today with a shortage of PlayStation 5s, right? But there was a mass exodus of people going, I am not going to use the PlayStation Plus service, etc. But it's an effect on the brand, right? And it hurts the brand as an organization. And brand has become extremely important these days, especially in kind of climate we're in at the moment, right? Is do you want people to use your digital services? And are they comfortable using their digital services as well? Like, so for example, I have a banking app. It allows me to scan a check now, whereas before I would have had to kind of go and deliver that myself. Do I trust for that, especially with the fact that it potentially has someone's signature on it, it has their account details, their sort code. Do I really want to trust a mobile application taking a picture of that thing and sending it? Where's the interception? Right? What could someone do? And I think that
years ago was something organizations spoke about as a risk that they would insure against and get insurance. And we used to kind of speak about, oh, well, I'm insured against that. Whereas now it's something beyond just money, isn't it? It's that reputation and everything else.
Exactly. And I think, that's really the supply chain, right? What people need to understand, I think this is something developers probably need to appreciate more, is the supply chain is actually a term that states where you source your components from and where do they end up going as well, right? Where are the things that I'm using in my pipeline, whether it's open source code, whether it's I've taken a snippet of code from somewhere else, where is it going? And it just shows you kind of the importance of really understanding what my impact is as a developer in the pipeline. I mean, look at what's happening in the US at the moment, right? I believe only today, Joe Biden has created an executive order for organizations as a mandate to create something called a software bill of materials, right? It's what do I have in my application? And we here, I think in Europe, see this as something like one copyright statements, like license attribution reports, but it goes further than that, right? It's you're providing me a piece of software rather than me knowing where that piece of software comes and who I need to attribute the work to. I want to know what's inside of that thing now, right? What is it doing, right? And I think that's really become quite important. And so I guess it kind of follows on to where I think, my next question comes from is, do you think that concept of this software bill of materials or this itinerary of this itemization of what's inside of your application has changed the communication between the traditional security team and the development team, right? Has that brought them together more? Has that alienated them a little bit more? What are your thoughts on that, right? Especially, with all these moves to focusing on the vendor tools, the supply chain, the software bill of material.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question. I think maybe it's a bit difficult to answer in one statement, but it has changed a lot. That's for sure. If I see now, indeed, I mean, everybody's using open source frameworks from all over the place, basically, and that is a really different approach than saying I'm going to buy something from a big vendor and I'm going to trust that tool. So that's a completely different mindset. And then again, I think that the responsibilities end up more at your own organization in with your own developers, because you cannot just point your finger to your vendor that you bought it from, like, hey, we paid so much money and you better have it secure, and that's it. Now you say, I'm trusting my developers to build a great software tool, and they are allowed to go on the internet basically, and get the latest and greatest open source frameworks that are out there. But then you also have to grasp what does that involve. Keep your dependencies up to date. Always do a code check. Don't trust the foreign code, so to say, that you just take into your environment. And that's a change that has happened in the recent years.
Yeah, I think so. And I guess, Amir, from your perspective, obviously being very, very kind of intimate with, your development teams and stuff, is that something you have taken on board? Is that something that's mandated of you, right, as an individual?
So it's partially mandated. There are other items that are mandated in how we do engineering. Once we have, if we're SOC 2 compliant and compliance with other standards, so they do define some things which are overall, I think, helpful in getting overall engineering more secure. But it's not enough, because say you're using a SaaS service like CodeCo, for example, within your pipeline. Just having that listed isn't enough, because now you need to understand what kind of access do they have. Do they have full access to everything? And basically, you need to define how much risk are they bringing into your own software. Either if it's the build, or if you're yourself providing a SaaS to another company, and it's a chain of elements that are connected, then you need to keep asking yourself, can you reduce that risk? Can you convert the SaaS to a hosting solution? Even if it brings more work on your end, it might reduce the risk of exposing critical entities to external tools and external services, and then you can do that also on different elements of code that you're providing. But so far to date, I haven't seen a requirement for software bill of materials like we had with, I would say, mechanical engineerings, because it's not required within the build process, because you're providing a few building blocks or an API or an SDK, but you're not giving the full chain of how you built that specific element that you're selling. So I think there is a long way to see how it's being orchestrated and what exactly is going to be defined within that. But it is an interesting direction to see the industry going toward.
Yeah, well, there are some, I think, there's not maybe a software bill of material, but there are, of course, ISO standards, etc., that some companies need to comply to be able to have like a certain certificate. I think that is already something which is out there. So and that could be like a point of attention if you buy, for example, software as a service, like a certain SaaS tool, then have a proper audit. And I think that one of the things you can already look at is what kind of ISO certificates does this company offer, but also maybe a little bit deeper than that. How does that integrate with my own cloud tool? That's something that probably the senior engineers and the security experts will already look into, and that's something that's already there. Maybe it can be a bit more mature in the next few years, but somehow it's already there.
Yeah, and actually there were a couple of points, and actually, Bas, you touched on one of those, and there were a couple of things I want to come back to actually with Amir. You said, you mentioned obviously the traditional, like the engineering world, right, where this bill of materials kind of doesn't exist. A bit of past history that I had, I worked with a very large automotive organization at one point in my career as kind of like a consultant, kind of an advocate for software. And it was mandated by their CTO. And obviously, if you think about this automotive industry, their focus has been product lifecycle management, right? So parts that go into vehicles, windscreen wipers, things that you'd think, well, these things are just, engineered by the organization that build the cars. But actually, this was an organization making those parts for all of the other manufacturers, like BMW, Jeep, and when Volvo was around, and those sort of things, right? And so they were building these parts, and so they were part of the supply chain. And interestingly enough, he mandated at that time that they were moving away from this product lifecycle management, because obviously the cost of investment was just simply too high, right? Just re-architecting these parts. But what he did state very clearly was, because they were moving more to an application lifecycle management and they were building these parts with a lifespan of about 10 years, he wanted the same regulatory compliance on the software that was going in the parts. So now he was saying, not only do I want to trace the part back, from 10 years ago, I want to know the exact software change, the commit, the developer, the license that implemented that change on that part at that time. And so now what you have in that organization, which is beautiful, by the way, because you think, look at the amount of changes that actually happen in these electronical parts. He's able, as an organization, to track 10 years in the past, the code commits, the changes that led up to that, that thing that would recall a vehicle, for example, like the airbags and things like that. So I think there is a motion. Believe it or not, I actually think the automotive industry is quite good at this, right? They've been doing this for many years. There's a guy called Edward Demings that defined the idea of the sort of lean approach to automotive. But another point that you mentioned, Amir, is bringing things on premise, not the cloud. A lot of developers these days, I think, have this focus on the cloud. And we have 3 minutes left, so I'll make this very quick. Focus on the cloud. That statement about, maybe more work bringing on premise, do you think that's actually something that organizations should seriously consider, given the fact that there is this big push, right, to go to the cloud, right? What does it really mean, right, for developers, right, especially with their tool sets?
So I'll answer that briefly. I see it as two elements to it. And first of all, there is the cost. The cost is on increasing operational on the team. Either DevOps or something else, but you're bringing more things that you need to manage. The upside is two parts. It's first of all reducing the risk, because you're not, whatever version, you're not using it externally, you're using it internally. Same as binding your software to a specific version of library and not having it automatically update. But then you need to constantly monitor the updates on that library, because maybe it's solving some CVE that you need to fix. And the latter is controlling, having a frame of mind of somebody might breach. Can I control the lateral movement? If they enter through a specific point, what kind of controls I have within the organization to make sure they don't have full control over everything? So whatever element was breached or whatever provider I was using, can I control how they're moving laterally within the network and limit them? So reduce the risk of a breach becoming a major security issue. So I would say use it, but very, very smallly. So for example, databases I would bring in, but there are tools that I would definitely use as SaaS and with all their cloud efficiency and everything that they bring, because that still has a lot of benefits. Bringing it inside is not something I would recommend as a general rule. It has to be very from very specific reasons, I would say.
Yeah, I think there's always a trade-off. So I think companies should be making those kind of decisions very, very sensitively and think about it very carefully. But the general push, of course, is to bring everything to the cloud, because it brings so many advantages. So I'm not sure if we can say that, take some things on premise, because that will lead to a better security if that's the right approach. I don't think that will be the way forward. I don't think it will catch up, so to say. Maybe one last thing I want to make about that is that I even see a development that goes further than the cloud, because we are moving towards edge computing, in the Internet of Things, where there's another layer of infrastructure and software and security and data being added to your system, because devices are getting smarter. They also need to be secured, etc., etc. So that makes it even more complicated, I think, in the future.
I agree. Well, look, I think we've got 23 seconds left. So this has been a great discussion. Thank you very much, Amir, Bas, Adam, for taking part in this. I think in summary, I think what I've learned is, the developers certainly have a pivotal role, I think, in security. And I think it's the responsibility of the organizations and the developers themselves to really help educate them, provide them the right tool sets, whether it is, a SaaS tool or a software composition analysis tool, or building that in the pipeline. But I think there is some education, I think, that needs to happen in the market, especially to allow developers to understand, that entire software supply chain and how it affects them, all the way to what you just finally on your final closing note, Bas, edge computing, right? It's getting wider and wider and wider, and the responsibility of them is higher. So fantastic, great. I mean, if you have any questions for any of the people on this panel, right, please reach out to us on Slack. I think we're all going to be around, right? So please feel free to reach out. And if you have any other questions, definitely put them in the chat and we'll get back to you. Brilliant. Well, thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks all. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Bye.